Well, let's turn to still chapter 3. We were nearing the end of the chapter. Last week we were talking about that section about honoring the neighbor or treating the neighbor correctly. In chapter 3, just a second, 27 to 30. Chapter 3, 27 to 30. Let me just read that again. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in the power of your hand to do so. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back, and tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Do not devise evil against your neighbor, for he dwells by you for safety's sake. Do not strive with a man without cause, if he has done you no harm. Very practical advice. Some of the very practical wisdom that the Lord wants us to learn from the Book of Proverbs. And of course, the Book of Proverbs is a very practical book all the way around, because it's talking about how to live your daily life in a way that is pleasing to God and applying His commandments and truths. We've said all that before, and Proverbs does a lot of repeating, not in the same way always, but does a lot of telling us the same thing in different ways. And if you've taught children or you've done any school teaching, you know that repetition is one of the great teachers. That you repeat. That's why Pastor, when he preaches from Matthew, goes back a couple of chapters and reviews a little, and then gets into the main context, because it's so helpful to repeat and then rethink and have things in your mind that are helpful to you to remember as you get into the next section. So let's talk just a little bit about the last part of this passage. I think that we have gotten down to the way you treat your neighbor, that you don't withhold good from your neighbor when you have what good you can do available. It's easy to do that. We are to do good when we can do it, and not put it off until tomorrow. Because so often it becomes an excuse if we put off till tomorrow what we could have actually done today, and then tomorrow comes and we still don't do it. So I think the proverb is wanting us not to be that kind of people, but to help people when we can, people that we owe to, that we owe help to, friends, family, people that we love and care about. And then in verses 28 to 30, he's talking about what I'm talking about here. But he also says in 329, don't devise or work evil against your neighbor, for he dwells by you for safety's sake. The last part of that might be a little bit difficult. If you've ever lived in a rural area, or an area where most of the people are doing subsistence farming, and they live, I'm thinking of the experience I had both in Nigeria and Ghana, where people lived in the rainforest area and they had villages, and in both Nigeria and Ghana, almost all of the tribes, they lived together in villages, and they would walk out every morning out to their farms. Why do you think they lived in villages instead of having a house on the farm?
For safety?
For safety. Safety from what? Safety from animals, but mostly safety from the human enemies, other tribes, other villages that might attack them. There were some tribes that lived. They had their own little house and little stuff like we do on ranches and things. They have their own little house out on the land where they live, but most of them lived in villages for safety, and they usually were fenced in to keep the animals out and stuff like that, and also to defend them against enemies. So in Israel, it would have been something like that. You have small villages, people go out and fish during the day, or they farm. They walk out to the farms, uh, but they live at night together so that they don't have uh, get attacked and things like that, and the safety in numbers. And so, you remember in Palestine in the days of the New Testament, there were still bears and lions, wolves, animals like that were still quite dangerous in portions of it. And especially back in the Old Testament days, in the days of the Proverbs. Uh, remember David killed a lion. We read about bears and stuff like that attacking people and so on. So they lived together for safety. Well, you don't want to not help take care of your neighbor, partially for your own self-interest, because you live together for safety. And if your neighbor, if situations arise in which your neighbor doesn't want to help you because you treated him badly. So don't sit around thinking about evil you can do against your neighbor. I don't think we're going to do that anyway, but I think the context probably is your neighbor does something to you you don't like, and so you're trying to figure out how to get even. Nobody would do that, would they? Has anybody ever done that to you? I mean, or you've done it to somebody else. What am I going to do? I know that sometimes when I've had conflict with people, sometimes for weeks, I will be thinking in a bad way, I guess. Well, I know it's a bad way. What could I have said to have made that person feel bad, or not have said what they said? And I think sit around and think of the things that I could have said to get even with what somebody said to me or did to me. Yeah, that is not what Proverbs is telling us to do. We don't devise evil against our neighbor because we live together. We're in a community. We protect one another, and living rightly within the community is what God wants us to do. That's a big part of pleasing God. Yes.
Everyday proverb. I was reading some this week for humor, and I read this one that kind of goes along with what you're saying. I won't let anybody else walk over my mind with their dirty feet. And I thought,
okay.
to me, what it meant was I won't let other people's negative thoughts or bad ways be a part of me.
Yeah. The only person you can really control is you. You can't control what others think, what others do. But you can do what the proverb says, or not be devising evil against your neighbor. From your own self-interest, partially, but simply because it's wrong otherwise. I think both of those would be true here. It says in verse 30, do not strive with a man without cause. We live in a society that just does that all the time. We have, how many legal cases do you hear about? People go to court against their neighbor for virtually nothing, it seems like. And you wonder, why in the world doesn't the judge throw that case out right off, first time he hears it? Because it's so silly, or so obviously, one of the cases that I think about, remember a couple of years, not more than that now, when a lady bought a cup of coffee at McDonald's, got it in her car, spilled it in her own lap, and then sued McDonald's and got millions of dollars because the coffee was too hot. Well, if McDonald's hadn't had the coffee too hot, she might have spilled in her lap and it was cold and sued them because it wasn't hot enough. You can't. Some things you can't win. And Proverbs is telling us here, don't do that. Don't strive without a real cause. Don't go to court without a real cause. You know, they would go into the gates, which we've read about and talked about before, but they would go to the gates and they would bring their legal cases, sometimes before the king, sometimes before other judges or magistrates to deal with the problems that they had in their culture. And notice he says, don't strive against a man without cause. There are causes for which you need to go to law rather than deal with it yourself, because sometimes in trying to deal with things like that, it can get violent. You don't want that either. But if he has done you no harm, you don't just go to court or strive against somebody else for nothing. If it's legitimate, fine, but so often it's not legitimate. Okay? So these are some things, some instructions dealing with neighbors, and we're going to see lots and lots of those in the book of Proverbs. I know you've read through it, and you see those kinds of instructions over and over and over, how we relate to our fellow human beings in day-to-day living situations and things that happen to us. And if we followed the way of Proverbs, we'd have a lot less problems. And that is precisely what the Lord wants. Our relationship with God is paramount, but our relationship with God entails good relationships with our fellow believers, our neighbors as well. Okay, any comment or question before we move on to the next section, the last little section of chapter 3. Remember the two great commandments in the New Testament? Yes, and that's really what Proverbs is saying over and over and over too. We love God, we relate to God, we take this wisdom from God, and that He's the source of the wisdom. Even though wisdom is personified, God is the source of the wisdom, and so our relationship with Him is paramount. But that relationship entails relationship with our fellow human beings as well, and we are to treat them right in ways that are pleasing to God. And that's really what we're saying. So that is a thing that is a truth that is taught throughout the Scriptures, Old and New Testament, relation to God, relation to our human beings, the commandments in our relationship to God, the first 4, and then the next 6 are primarily about our relationships to one another that derive from our relationship to God. All right, so verse 31, do not envy the oppressor and choose none of his ways. For the perverse person is an abomination to the Lord, but his secret counsel is God's secret counsel is with the upright. Have you ever been envious of bad people that are doing bad? It's a problem. You know, sometimes we're offended because bad people with bad attitudes prosper sometimes. We see that problem addressed in the Psalms and in a number of the Psalms, in a lot of places actually, that people are doing wicked, and yet they seem to be prospering. Now we know that ultimately, the Lord's going to bring justice over everything, including that. But from our perspective, from right now, we see the wicked prospering quite often. People who are oppressing others prospering quite often. And don't be envious of them, and don't choose their ways. Don't do what they do in order to get what they have, because they oppress others in order to gain from them, to manipulate them, to gain wealth reputation, whatever it is that they're going to get. Don't envy them and don't emulate them either. Too nice ease there. Alliteration. Don't envy and don't emulate. I didn't write that in my notes. I'll have to rewrite my notes and put that in there. That was pretty clever, don't you think, Pastor?
Good alliteration.
Alliteration. Yeah. Some people are quite gifted at doing that. I'm not. So that one just came by accident. So don't envy them and don't emulate them, either one. For the perverse person is an abomination to the Lord. The person that's the oppressor that you're not to envy or to emulate is that kind of person who twists things, turns things, manipulates things, lies, cheats, steals, does all those kind of things. That kind of person is an abomination to the Lord. The Lord despises that kind of behavior. So don't want to be like that. That ought to be obvious, but sometimes we need to be reminded that at the second half of verse 32, speaking about God, capital H on the his, but his secret counsel is with the upright. God counsels the upright. God speaks to the upright. Part of that is what we're reading right here in Proverbs. As God instructs his people, how to live in ways pleasing to him. That's the counsel that he's given. And it's secret only in the sense that fools and scoffers and so on won't hear it, don't want to hear it. And so for them, it's like it's a secret. And it's hidden from them. So it's not hidden from us. He's revealing it right here within the book of Proverbs. And continuing in the same theme in verse 33, the curse of the Lord is on the house of the wicked. That's a pretty strong statement because it's not a light thing to be under the curse of the Lord. It's a fearful thing to be under the curse of the Lord. And it's on the house of the wicked, on everything that he owns and on his whole family and stuff. It affects everything. And that curse of the Lord is on that because he doesn't like, he doesn't appreciate, he doesn't value that kind of behavior that is wicked to one's neighbor. It's just not pleasing to him. And so ultimately it will be cursed. We've seen that, you see that all the way through the scriptures of blessings and curses. Blessing and curses. You see it everywhere in the Psalms. You see it in those last chapters of Deuteronomy where the people are standing on the two mountains and there's blessings and curses of the Lord passed back and forth there. If you do this, the Lord will bless you. If you do that, the Lord will curse you, and so on. Cursed is the man who does these wicked, evil things, but he blesses the home of the just. So there's the opposite teaching there. He curses the wicked, blesses the just. You see this over and over and over through Proverbs. In all of these 10 teaching sessions that begin with my son that we've talked about prior, in all of those they end with some kind of denouncing the wicked and praising the just, because that's what God does. And this is where we are at the end of this one here as well. I think this is number 5. 4. Anyway, it's number 4, I believe. But the curses of the Lord is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the. And repeating that in a different way, slightly, but surely he scorns the scornful, but gives grace to the humble. Really saying the same thing, only it's talking about something specific that the wicked do. That is that they scorn others, they mock others, they ridicule others. And the Lord scorns them. He does to them what they do to others. Same word. He scorns them, he mocks them, he ridicules them. And he gives grace to the humble. That's the only way we find real, genuine forgiveness with God in our relationship with God, is through his grace, through his blessing us, blessing those that follow him. Humility is not something that in the ancient world was treasured very much. In fact, not treasured at all in most of the cultures of the ancient world. And unfortunately, it's not in a lot of cultures in our modern world either. We as Christians tend to value humility, but we would like to scorn those who aren't humble sometimes, would we not? You ever had anybody that was really arrogant and proud that you know, and you had a hard time keeping a straight face when the axe fell on them? You ever have that problem? You have a hard time not rejoicing when all of a sudden they're shown not to be near as powerful or strong or smart as they thought they were. Well, all right.
Not supposed to.
We're not supposed to do that. No, I don't think we're supposed to do that. I think that's part of what it means to be humble. But we're the recipients of God's grace. And, when you're the recipient of all the good things that God has to give you through his grace, through his mercy, through his love, you know that it doesn't come from you. You know that this wisdom that is being proclaimed throughout this book, and all that wisdom does for you, that doesn't come from you. There's nothing to be arrogant about. There's nothing to be proud about in all of that. It doesn't come from you. It comes from God. So you don't need to be proud that you're humble. Humility is a characteristic that is not valued by the world much. Sometimes when somebody really shows humility, maybe the world will value it a little bit. For the most part, it's something that we value, and it's because of the graciousness of God towards us in everything that we have, material, physical, spiritual, comes from the Lord ultimately. Yeah, Bill?
Verse 33, what is the curse of the Lord? What does that mean to them? Is that death? Is that bad luck?
Yes.
Everything?
It's all of the things that God will do when the time comes for him to show who he is to that person and to recompense them for the evil that they have done. You see on a grand scale, you see it all the time in the Old Testament, where God will destroy a nation, literally destroy a nation that has been arrogant and proud and humble and boastful, like the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Egyptians. Early on in the Old Testament, maybe the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, all of the enemies of Israel that were so proud of what they did to Israel. On that large scale, God ultimately destroyed those nations. And when Israel and Judah turned against him in idols and rebelled against the way of the Lord, he also punished them on a macro scale, on a big scale. But that punishment and that cursing can come right down to the personal level too, on an individual basis. And you see that throughout the Old Testament. Look at what happened to David after he committed adultery with Bathsheba and had Uriah killed, murdered, really, and lost the child of that union, and so on. So, those issues of cursing can come right down to us as individuals when we displease the Lord. Holly?
I think that God not only, there's a curse that's a natural thing from the Lord, but I think also he grieves because that's not what he made us. And he made everybody. So he grieves when, I think, when someone is doing something not going to help them ultimately.
Yes, we're told not to grieve the Holy Spirit who lives in us and dwells in us and who is grieved when we do things that are displeasing to the Lord.
There's a whole chapter, well, more than one chapter in Deuteronomy, chapter 28 especially, where Moses is getting this word from the Lord about the blessings of obeying the covenant that they have with God and the curses that will come if they don't. And he lists one after another of the blessings, and then one after another of the curses. And the blessings are things like the Lord will cause your enemies, to run away from you, to flee. The Lord will command blessing on your storehouses. He'll establish you as his holy people. All the peoples of the earth will call you blessed. So these are the types of blessings, and then the curses. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body, and the land will not produce for you. Cursed you will be when you go in and come out. You'll have confusion. The Lord will make plagues. He'll strike you with fever. The heavens will not open up the rain for you. Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. There's blessings for obedience in that covenant and cursings for disobedience. And the Lord, may not do exactly like he did with the covenant with Israel, with us, but we know that there is a great blessing, promised for obedience to God. And if we don't, then we are asking for the curses, and the Lord doesn't do that in order to, because he hates us. He does it because he loves us. He allowed the curses to come upon the nation of Israel so that they would be drawn back to him and stop disobeying him and enjoy the blessings that he had promised them. So I think that's a major part of what the writer of Proverbs is getting at here, are the blessings and curses, that are found in the law, in the covenant that God had given to them.
Yeah. And back earlier, remember we read that my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord. The Lord punishes us, and that's part of what the curse idea, I think, is. It's not a curse on his own people to destroy them utterly, but it is to bring them back into proper relationship with himself. And in the New Testament, that's made abundantly clear that that is the case for Christians. The Lord punishes us, the Lord disciplines us, not because he hates us, but quite the opposite, because he loves us and he cares about us. So it's all of these things that can happen. And, that list that he read there, the fruitfulness of your fields, if the Lord blesses you and you have adequate rain, you don't have the insect plague and something on your crops and they grow well, or you have children at the appropriate time, and so on and so on and so forth. And the opposite of that is a curse, when the Lord withholds those things, or doesn't bring those things, or does bring them in the case of enemies and locusts and things like that. So it's any of those kinds of things that the Lord blesses us with. The milk and honey of the promised land will be withheld from those who are cursed and blessed upon those who are not, who are the just and the righteous. So, yeah, so look at verse, yes,
I think God was pretty smart.
that's good.
I mean, in the simplistic, childlike way that my brain thinks, God does good so that you see how good he is. if we didn't have that good, then we wouldn't appreciate how bad the curses could be. If he cursed us first, why would we turn to him? So he did us good first.
Okay.
And that way we have a better idea of why we should turn back to him when we fall away and something happens to us that's not one of his blessings.
Well, that's true. The Lord, look how he has blessed our country in the past. And look where we're heading now. Why is that? We have turned away from God in large part. That doesn't mean every individual has, of course, but as a nation, we have done that. And when Israel did that, conquered either by the northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians, the southern kingdom 150 years later by the Babylonians, sent into exile for 70 years, and that was a curse. That was a huge curse on the nation. But of course, when the nation's cursed, the individuals in the nation also are cursed because they live in those circumstances. The Lord can withhold rain, or he can give rain, and famine and so on. I lived in a country in Africa, in Ghana, we had 7 or 8 years of famine and almost no rain, drought. And the situation just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And finally it eased up. But those things can come from God as curses on the wicked, the unjust. But notice verse 35. The wise shall inherit glory. Over and over in the New Testament, and I think of 1 Peter particularly, talks about the inheritance that Christians have. And a big part of that inheritance is to be with Christ and to be with the glory of Christ and to be glorified along with Christ. But even that's promised right here in the Old Testament as well. The wise. Don't read that being the smart. That is not what wise means. It's not the smart who inherit glory, it's the wise. Remember that wisdom is applying the commandments, the teachings of the Lord in ways that please the Lord. That's wisdom. It's not just being smart, being an Albert Einstein or some other brilliant person. Nothing wrong with being smart, and there's a lot of smart people around. But there's a lot of smart, wicked people around too. Really wicked people. People talk about people like, everybody likes to call everybody else, it seems these days in political circles, Hitler. It's odd they don't use Stalin. Stalin was as bad or worse than Hitler in terms of the amounts, it's not in terms of the number of people that they killed. But those people weren't stupid. They were really smart in a lot of ways, but they were not smart in the eyes of God. They were not wise in the eyes of God. So don't read the smart shall inherit glory. I can't emphasize that enough. If that were true, then a lot of us would just be in trouble, wouldn't we? But shame shall be the legacy of fools. So the opposite. We will receive glory, we will receive honor, we will receive the blessings of the Lord that we will inherit from the Lord. Remember, again, it's from the Lord. That's where the inherited glory comes from. And the shame shall be the legacy of fools. We probably in our culture don't think of shame near as much as a lot of other cultures do. A lot of Oriental cultures and African cultures as well, shame and honor are huge social constructs. To have honor, to have glory is the greatest thing of all. And to be shamed, humiliated, that kind of thing is the worst thing. I know that I've talked about it before in a number of contexts about how in Ghana, to be in the Asante culture that I knew best in Ghana, you could call a person a liar, a thief, a scoundrel, a rascal, all kinds of things, but don't ever call them a fool. Unless you want to fight. Literally fight. You don't call people fools because they are proud of their wisdom. And to call somebody a fool was a terrible thing. So this whole idea of being glorified by God, being given glory by God, and then the opposite of that, the shame of the shall be given to the fools. Those who refuse to listen to God and to listen to His wisdom and to obey what He says to do to be wise. Those will receive shame in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the people of God as well. Because these are really insulting words. To be shamed. In Japanese culture, you've all heard of harikari, where people slit their own stomachs open with a knife. Maybe you've seen a movie like Shogun or something like that, and they commit suicide. That is because of honor and shame. It is better to die than to be shamed in many cultures of the world. It was true for the generals. When they wanted to execute a general displeased the emperor, he didn't have him killed. He handed him a knife and said, "Go to your room and kill yourself. You're being humiliated. You're being demoted. Your armies are being taken away from you, or your wealth is being taken away from you." And because they couldn't bear the thought of being humiliated before the whole nation, they would just go kill themselves. Same thing happened in Japan in earlier days. But here, the shame will be the legacy of those who reject the teachings of God and the wisdom of God. Shame. So it's a strong cultural thing. Don't be one of those people. Be one of those that is wise and will inherit glory. This stark contrast. And we see this throughout Proverbs. Every chapter virtually has got something to do with that kind of thing. That between what God does for the wise and what happens to the wicked. Okay? Don't be part of the shame of the wicked. Okay? Comment? Well, I think we'll quit there today a little bit early, but next week we'll start into chapter 9, and this will be the 5th of the teaching sessions where it begins my son or my sons, and we have the teaching. And this is a neat one. I like this one in chapter 4, verses 1 to 9. Especially the second part of it, the benefit